Chapter 4. Medieval Portugal. Under Moorish pressure. The Cantabrian mountains of northern Spain had provided refuge for the Christians. This refuge served as the basis for a medieval Christian Iberia defined by war with the Muslims. Rejecting the latter culturally, as well as in political and religious terms, the Christians sought to assert continuity with the Visigoths, and through them, with the Romans. Thus, Bishop Blaeu of Oviedo, ruled 1098 or 1101 to 1130, claimed that the relics of major saints were brought north from the Visigoth capital Toledo in the time of the Kingdom of the Asturias, about 718 to 910. His claims, however, were untrue, and were aspects of the truth by fabrication that was important to the assertion of continuity. Separately, the invocation of Visigothic law remained a standard procedure in courts in northern Iberia. The Christian north was also an area in which monasteries were established. Artistic motifs developed, and these were linked to patterns elsewhere in Christendom. Thus, Romanesque-style horseshoe arches featured in churches built from the 9th century. Religious conviction, then, has left a range of stories and cults to the present. At Nazaré, it is possible in the Baroque Church of Our Lady of Nazareth to see a sculpture of the Virgin that was allegedly made by Joseph. It is also possible there to see paintings that refer to a local legend, that of how the Virgin in 1182 saved a local noble from following the deer he was chasing into a chasm. At the site, a chapel was built to give thanks and to house a statue of the Virgin. Further south, at Caba Especial, a 13th century vision of the Madonna coming out of the sea on a mule led to the site becoming a pilgrimage destination that has lasted as such to the present. Frequent warfare, however, brought devastation to the north until the Muslims were pushed south. There was also incessant conflict within and between the small Christian principalities, as authority was asserted and power contested. This incessant situation was encouraged by the extent to which the legitimation of authority rested on power, and doubly so due to the lack of any true cohesion in what was a war-banned society adopting feudalism. Moreover, notions of legitimation were affected by the difficulty of fixing succession practices, let alone rules, a situation seen more widely in medieval Christendom that lasted for Portugal into the early 19th century. However, the focus in conflict was that between these principalities and the Muslims. Muslim raiding was for long a major aspect of life in the principalities. It had functional purposes in the quest for booty, notably slaves. There were also, certainly later, ideological goals, particularly the punishment of unbelievers. The determination of men to assert their role and masculinity through military activity was very important. The drive southwards. There was counter-raiding by the Christian principalities, including of Lisbon in 798, as well as territorial expansion southward and political ambition. Asturias expanded southwards in the 9th century and became the Kingdom of Leon. Vímara Pérez, a vassal of the ruler, was named Count of Portugal in 868 after he conquered the region north of the Douro, including Oporto. He founded a fortified town, Guimaraes, which became present-day Guimarães. A modern statue of him is by the cathedral in Oporto, and one of the major streets there is named after him. The second Count of Portugal within the kingdom was his son, Lucidio Guimaraes, jointly with Hermenegildo Gutierrez. These two families dominated the governorship of the county until the 11th century. This is an obscure period, and to follow it, it is necessary to note references to individuals in charters. Portugal comes from Portucale, which is based on the Roman settlements of Portus and Cale on the Douro estuary. Portus became Oporto. In the 10th century, Córdoba resumed incursions into northern Iberia, recapturing Coimbra. However, in the 11th century, after civil war broke out in Córdoba in 1009, the Christian states began to take advantage of what was happening, and increasingly took the initiative. Oporto had already been reconquered by 1000, followed by Braga in 1040 and Lamego in 1057. In 1064, Ferdinand I of Castile and Leon captured Coimbra. The last Count of Portugal from the family of Vimera Pérez, Nuno Mendes, sought greater autonomy, which led to his being defeated and killed at the Battle of Pedroso in 1071. The victor, King Garcia II of Galicia, a son and heir of Ferdinand I and Sancho of Leon, whose Leonese inheritance included the lands Garcia would be given, then called himself King of Galicia and Portugal. He was the first to call himself King of Portugal. Garcia, who had succeeded to his estates in 1065, had territory south of the river Mondego, as well as tribute from the Arab rulers of Badajoz and Seville. His reign saw the re-establishment of bishoprics, including at Braga and Lamego, as a way to assert royal authority and to demonstrate legitimacy. In 1071, however, Garcia was attacked by his brother Alfonso VI of Leon, ruled 1065 to 1109, who invaded Portugal, only for the latter to be defeated in 1072 by their other brother Sancho II of Castile, ruled 1065 to 1072, with whom he had jointly dispossessed Garcia the previous year. Sancho, who was helped by El Cid, which means the Lord, was crowned King of Leon, but was assassinated with the use of his own sword later that year. Alfonso regained his throne, reuniting Ferdinand I's kingdom, helped by his imprisoning Garcia for the rest of the latter's life. Galicia was to stay with Leon and Castile and not be part of Portugal, as might otherwise have appeared logical. Many castles remain from the 11th century, including the domineering one at Penela and also that at Aruca. Much of central Portugal was overrun by the Christians at the end of the century, but the Almoravid victory at Sagrajas, north of Badajoz in 1086, was a major blow that stopped the advance. So also with the Battle of Uclés in 1108. In contrast to the emphasis on heavy cavalry in conflict in France, in Portugal, as in Spain, there was a far greater stress on light cavalry. This proved more effective against the Moors, less expensive, and better attuned to the hot and arid environment. Alfonso VI was succeeded by his eldest child, Urraca, who was married to Raymond of Burgundy. Their son was Alfonso VII, ruled 1126 to 1157, under whom Leon proved particularly strong. Crowned Emperor of Spain, like his grandfather and mother, Alfonso VII, who inherited the united throne of Leon, Castile and Galicia, campaigned against the Almoravids and expanded his power southward to the Tagus, in turn raiding well south of there. Alfonso VII divided his kingdom between his sons, so Castile separated from Leon in 1157. Portugal had already become fully independent in 1143 under Afonso Henriques, Alfonso I, victor over the Muslims at Urique in 1139. He was a son of Henry of Burgundy, himself a grandson of Duke Robert I of Burgundy, who had arrived the previous century in order to pursue his fortune, and had married Teresa, illegitimate daughter of Alfonso VI, and therefore a grandson of Alfonso VI. Henry was a brother of Raymond of Burgundy. In 1086, Alfonso VI had appealed for help against the Almoravids, which led to the Burgundians going to Portugal. Henry had been made Count of Portugal by Alfonso in 1096. Teresa became Count of Portugal in 1112 on the death of her husband during the siege of Astorga. Becoming independent. In 1127, Afonso Henriques revolted against Teresa. He defeated his mother in 1128 at the Battle of Samamed near Guimarães, establishing his control of Portugal, over which he proclaimed himself prince in 1129. He then turned on the Moors, capturing Leiria in 1135 and winning a major victory at Urique in 1139. At Lamego in 1143, Afonso convened a Cortes, a parliament, that confirmed him as King Afonso I. Victory at Valdevez in 1140 or 1141 had led to the Treaty of Zamora, 1143, by which unwilling Leon, under his cousin Alfonso VII, recognized Portugal as sovereign. In 1179 the title was confirmed by Pope Alexander III, after the earlier Pope, Lucius II, had refused recognition because he did not want Iberia divided, but rather united against the Moors. The recognition of kingship was important not only insofar as independence from the Spanish rulers was concerned, but also was related to the process by which political authority was increasingly considered as hereditary property. This was linked to a longer-term consolidation of territory under fewer sovereigns and patriarchal dynasties. War was a key theme, one reflected in surviving buildings such as Leiria Castle. The Romanesque cathedral at Coimbra, built by Afonso I for a bishopric created in 1064, could also serve as a fortress with its crenellations and narrow windows. In 1147, Afonso pressed south in what became a key campaign for the history of Portugal. Lisbon, Santarém and Sintra were captured from the Moors, Porto de Mos following in 1148. English crusaders, en route to the Holy Land, played a major role in the bloody siege of Lisbon. By the time of Afonso's death in 1185, the frontier was well to the south. Beja falling in 1162, Évora in 1165 and Olivença in 1170. Évora became a bishopric in 1166. There are many memorials to this process. Évora has a statue of Gerald the Fearless, Portugal's El Cid, decapitating a Moor, and has him on its coat of arms, while its central plaza, the Praça do Geraldo, is named after him. He also conquered Trujillo and Cavares. However, Portuguese expansion led to rivalry with Ferdinand II of Leon, and this produced conflict in 1169, with Ferdinand capturing some of Portugal's recent gains. Gerald pressed on to capture Beja in 1172 before falling out with Afonso I and, like another El Cid, putting himself in the service of the Caliph. Ecclesiastical independence from Spain had already been established. Part of northern Portugal had been under the Archdiocese of Santiago de Compostela, where relics of St. James made the see more potent. Toledo, the ancient Visigothic primatial see, reconquered in 1085, was the other source of ecclesiastical authority. But in 1110, Braga was restored to its former role as an archbishopric, and was thus not under Toledo, with which relations had long been poor. This was a key element in what became Portuguese separation from Spain, and one of lasting significance due to the importance of clerics in culture and society. In 1390, the province of Braga was divided to create the Archdiocese of Lisbon. By then the largest city in the kingdom, it had been made capital by Afonso III in 1256, replacing Coimbra, and its status had increased in 1173 when the relics of St. Vincent were transferred from the Algarve. Relics were a crucial form of legitimation. Henry of Burgundy had made the Moorish citadel in Lisbon a royal palace. The central role of the crown in driving back the Moors helped ensure that the church in Portugal was very much under royal control. There was a measure of Muslim pushback under the Almohads, including the defeat of Afonso I at Badajoz in 1170 and the recapture of Olivença in 1189, but their siege of Santarém failed in 1184. Afonso was succeeded by his son Sancho I, ruled 1185 to 1211. Focusing on expansion to the south, he captured and fortified Silves in 1189, only to lose it in 1191 when he had to turn north to respond to the revived threat from Leon and Castile, which led him to found Guarda in 1197 and to reconstruct and repopulate Monsanto. Sancho was also noted for his attempts to repopulate remote parts of northern Portugal. Sancho's successor, Afonso II, ruled 1211 to 1223, did not concentrate on expansion against the Moors, and instead focused on developing the existing state, not only by introducing written laws, but also by trying to limit the dominant position of the Church. This led to his being excommunicated by Pope Honorius III. However, the crushing victory in a crusade of Alfonso VIII of Castile, with support from Aragon, Navarre and Portugal, in a surprise attack on the Almohad Caliph's army at Las Navas de Tolosa, near Jaén in Andalusia, on the 16th of July 1212, was followed not only by the overrunning of Andalusia by the Castilians, but also by the Portuguese advancing south to conquer the Algarve. The castle of Alcácer do Sal was successfully besieged in 1217. Afonso's son, Sancho II, ruled 1223 to 1248, focused on territorial expansion against the Moors, capturing Sesimbra in 1236 and Silves in 1242. However, hostile nobles and clerics overthrew Sancho with the crucial help of Pope Innocent IV, who ordered his removal in 1247. A civil war accompanied by Castilian intervention produced chaos, and Sancho died in exile in Spain in 1248, being succeeded by his brother Afonso, who had been called to the throne by some of the nobility in 1246. Afonso III, ruled 1248 to 1279, sought support by calling a Cortes in 1254, the first attended by commoners, and also conquered the Algarve, capturing Faru, the last Moorish fortress, in 1249. That, however, did not end conflict. The Marinid Sultanate of Morocco, which had supplanted the Almohads in 1269, began attacking the Christian kingdoms in 1275 and had some successes. However, in 1340, Afonso IV of Portugal and his son-in-law, Alfonso XI of Castile, decisively defeated Abu al-Hassan, the Black Sultan, at the Battle of Rio Salado near Tarifa. Most of the army was Castilian, but the Portuguese played a key role, defeating the forces from Granada. This decisive defeat led to the Marinids returning to North Africa. Afonso commissioned the Padrao do Salado, a monument in Guimarães, to commemorate the sweeping victory. Christianization. Conquest saw Christianization in conquered areas, notably with church building, as with the Romanesque cathedral at Braga. Many churches, for example the Cathedral of Silves, which became a bishopric in 1253, were built on the same foundations as the mosques they replaced, which was an important part of the removal and reuse of the Muslim legacy. The church of Santa Maria del Macava in Lamego was built in the 12th century on the site of a Muslim cemetery. The church of St. Peter at Lourosa incorporates Roman, Visigothic and Moorish remains. Moreover, Muslim baths, which fulfilled ritual as well as social functions, were built over. In areas that were already part of the Christian kingdoms in Iberia, there was an architectural celebration of victory, with churches built or extended. In response to his vow to the Virgin in 1147 to do so, if he was able to capture Santarém, Afonso I in 1153 founded a major Cistercian monastery at Alcobaça, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Many Muslims had fled from the conquered territories, but others remained to till the soil, some of whom were forced into slavery. This quest for slaves was supplemented by raiding, especially into North Africa. However, the architectural aesthetics of the Islamic world were also adopted in many respects, Thus, the Capella da Gloria in Braga Cathedral was painted in Moorish geometric motifs in the 16th century. Resettlement by Christians, as Christian kingdoms expanded southwards in Iberia, was part of a long-standing process of growth and development through internal settlement. Migration and colonization were key elements of policy. They drew on a broader process of population increase and agricultural development, but there were specific political aspects as authority was consolidated. This process included the establishment of towns, for example Cerna-Hecelia in the 10th century. Moreover, military bases were designed to serve as governmental centres and economic nodes. New monastic orders were a help to settlement, especially the Cistercians. The first Cistercian monastery in Portugal, that of Saint João de Tarouca, was founded in 1124. In the leafy Varosa Valley, south of the Douro, it is now largely ruined, and certainly is not as preserved as the nearby Cistercian monasteries of Salcedas, founded in 1168. The Cistercians played a major role in introducing the Gothic to Portugal. Alongside significant transitional Romanesque Gothic works, the Gothic style became important from the 13th century. Other orders also founded monasteries, while the friars were responsible for foundations, such as the 13th century Franciscan convent at Santarém. The foundations were confiscated in the 19th century, but their churches often survive separately, as in the Santa Clara Church in Oporto. Religious military orders, which gained, settled and protected extensive estates, were another help to settlement, notably the Order of the Templars, which existed in Portugal from 1128, that of the Hospitallers, the Order of Calatrava, a Castilian order, and that of Avige, which was founded in 1146. These orders linked the church and the aristocracy from which they recruited. Almorol, an island in the Tagus, is an attractive Templar site, where the Moorish castle was rebuilt from 1171. The Templars were also given a large area in Beira Baixa in 1165 as a way to consolidate the Portuguese presence, and this led to the building of castles at Monsanto and Didania Aveia in 1171. Economic expansion. Settlement responded to the environment, to economic possibilities, and to the question of scale, and these variations produced a very diverse human geography in nearby settled areas. Further south, in the newly conquered regions, there were large, lightly populated areas and more Muslims. Large estates were created there, mostly to the benefit of the church and the nobility. Most Christian peasants, however, remained further north. In that region there was an intensification of settlement, not least with the rebuilding of existing sites. For example, churches were extended, with the chapel at Balsemão expanded in the 14th century. Over the long term, from the 10th to the 14th centuries, agricultural prosperity was helped by a rising population, which provided markets and workers, as well as by improved technology, including the introduction of windmills from the 11th century. The wealthy, however, found it easier to benefit than independent peasant proprietors, many of whom were hit by problems and reduced to subordination. Medieval divisions. Aside from defending the country against Castile with new fortifications, for example at Valença do Minho and at Monção, Afonso III had to defend the conquest of the Algarve from Castilian claims, and succeeded in doing this by the Treaty of Badajoz of 1267. He also proved able to resist papal demands, and thus offered an important assertion of sovereignty. His successor Dinis in Portuguese, ruled 1279 to 1325, pushed through reform, including of the judicial system. A very cultured and learned individual, in 1290 he founded a university in Lisbon, which was finally established permanently in Coimbra in 1537. Denis also strengthened Portuguese government and the state, not least by a concordat with the Pope in 1289 that extended royal jurisdiction over church property, by signing a treaty with England in 1308, and by building or strengthening fortifications on or near the frontier with Castile, as at Chaves, where only the keep survives, Beja, Castelmiendo, Castelo Rodrigo, Estremoz, Linares, Pinel, Sabugal, Sorteio and Trancoso, where the town walls survive. Although not a warrior king, Denis took advantage of the death of Sancho IV of Castile in 1295 and fought the infant Ferdinand IV of Castile in 1295 to 1297. In the Treaty of Alcañiz of 1297, Denis gave up some frontier villages, but gained Olivenza and confirmation of possession of the Algarve. The treaty also led to an alliance that kept the peace for 40 years. Denis's main residence was in the castle at Leiria, and a legacy from his reign was his major expansion of the Pinal de Leiria, a pine forest on the coast that provided a barrier to the inward spread of the coastal dunes, and that also served as a source for timber for shipbuilding. His support for the economy was seen with his chartering of fairs, which encouraged trade as well as agricultural production for the market. This helped increase the activity and goods subject to taxation. Denis was also responsible for the lower story of the Cloister of Silence in the monastery at Alcobaça and for the castle at Óbidos, the town he gave to his wife as a wedding gift. In response to the papal suppression of the Templar order in 1312, Denis transformed it in Portugal into the Order of Our Lord Jesus Christ, which was founded in 1317. Its headquarters from 1356 were at Tomar, and it played an important role in Portuguese history, notably when Henry the Navigator was its lay governor. The economic, social and political situation became far more difficult subsequently, notably with the Black Death of 1348 to 1350, which led to the death of about a third of the population. Land was abandoned, villages deserted, and agricultural production fell, putting a strain on revenues. Social tensions rose markedly as landlords sought to increase their return from the now smaller workforce. Sheep rearing, which required fewer workers, expanded, as in England, and produced benefits for those involved, principally major landowners. Denis's son, Afonso IV, ruled 1325 to 1357, had difficult relations with Castile, and these interacted with Portuguese court politics, as Afonso's heir, Peter, had a relationship with his wife's lady-in-waiting, Inés de Castro, a member of the Galician nobility with Castilian links. The death of his wife led in 1345 to Peter living openly with Inés and recognizing all her children as his. Concerned about growing Castilian influence, Afonso ordered the murder of Inés in 1355. A furious Peter rebelled, only to be defeated. When, soon after, Peter succeeded to the throne as Peter I, ruled 1357 to 1367, he had two of the killers brought back from Spain and executed publicly in 1361. He ripped their hearts out. The story that Peter had Inés exhumed and crowned, and that he ordered the court to pay homage to her, only dates from 1577, and is probably a myth. They are buried facing each other in the monastery of Alcobaça, so that they would see each other when reborn at the Last Judgment. Peter's successor, Ferdinand I, ruled 1367 to 1383, claimed the Castilian throne in 1369, and this helped further to involve Portugal in the complex dynastic and domestic politics of Castile. Castilian forces burned and pillaged Lisbon in 1373. Ferdinand left no male heir and was succeeded, not as agreed in 1382, by his daughter Beatrice, the wife of John I of Castile, but by his illegitimate half-brother John, after an interregnum in which John at first assassinated Count João Fernando Zandeiro, the Galician lover of Ferdinand's widow Leonor, who had been left in charge. Similarly, Alfonso I had needed, in 1128, to defeat his mother Teresa and her lover, Count Fernão Pérez de Trava of Galicia, who had dominated Portugal from 1121 until the defeat. Civil conflict in 1383 to 1385 saw Leonor backed by much of the nobility and clergy and associated with Castilian control, while John relied on the support of the middling orders. Leonor was forced to abdicate from the regency by John I of Castile, who invaded in 1384, besieging Lisbon without success. The foundation of the House of Aviges. In 1385 the Cortes, the Parliament, met at Coimbra and acclaimed John as King John I, ruled 1385 to 1433, the first of the House of Aviges. In 1385 the Castilians attacked anew. A subsidiary force invaded the Minho, being defeated at Trancoso. John I of Castile, with French help, meanwhile advanced into central Portugal with a 31,000-strong army. He was defeated on the 14th of August, 1385, at Aljubarrota. 200 English archers played a significant role in the battle, which, by extension, was part both of the 100 Years' War between England and France, 1337 to 1453, and of the dynastic politics and warfare by which John, Duke of Lancaster, a younger son of Edward III of England, sought to establish his family on the throne of Castile. The 6,600-strong Portuguese force defeated the Castilians, with heavy losses for the latter. This major battle can be well understood thanks to an interpretative centre on the battlefield near Batalha, Battle, where a dramatic monastery, Santa Maria da Vitória, was built in 1388 to 1434 in fulfilment of John I of Portugal's vow to the Virgin Mary to do so in return for his victory. The Gothic interior holds the tombs of John, his English wife, Philippa of Lancaster, Queen 1387 to 1415, a daughter of John of Gaunt, and 4 of their 6 sons, the illustrious generation, including Henry the Navigator, whose alleged birthplace in 1394 can be visited in the Casa do Infanta in Oporto. Building on the Anglo-Portuguese Treaty of 1373, which established a perpetual friendship, the Treaty of Windsor of 1386, a pact of mutual support, launched a period of continuous alliance between England and Portugal. This was reinforced in later treaties, notably in 1654, 1660, 1661, 1703, 1815 and 1899, although the alliance clearly lapsed during the period of Spanish kings from 1580 to 1640. In 1943, Winston Churchill referred to the 1373 treaty when announcing the granting to Britain of base rights in the Azores. After her marriage at Oporto, Philippa had John's mistress banished from court to a convent, where she became the prioress. Other royal wives were to have a similar problem, including those of John V and Joseph I. Influential at court, Philippa backed the scheme to conquer Ceuta. Victory at Aljubarrota in 1385 was followed by the retreat of the Castilian army, and by the aristocracy rallying round John, who won a further victory at Valverde in Castile later that year. The Portuguese towns, still held by the Castilians, surrendered. John I of Castile's death in 1390 guaranteed peace. The opposition between Portugal and Castile, and their alignment respectively with England and France, ensured that the two backed rival popes during the Great Schism, which in turn exacerbated differences. The warfare of the period helped ensure that many of the fortifications from the medieval period were directed against invasion from Castile or civil war, rather than against the Moors. Thus, in 1356 to 1376, Oporto received impressive new walls. The Gothic cloister in its cathedral also dates from the 14th century. John, moreover, greatly strengthened the castle at Braganza. In Sintra, he rebuilt a palace on a Moorish fort. Meanwhile, the key monument to late medieval Portugal remains Batalha, where the monastery was followed from about 1430 by sumptuous cloisters, which included a series of royal mortuary chapels. However, they remain unfinished because Manuel I, ruled 1495 to 1521, great-grandson of John I of Portugal, moved instead to found a large new monastery at Jerónimos near the Tagus coast at Belém. Commissioned around 1501, this represented a major shift in the focus of Portuguese attention towards the oceans. A key consolidator of Portuguese power, and the longest reigning of all Portuguese rulers, John not only founded the royal house of Aviz, but also was the progenitor of that of Braganza, because his illegitimate son became, in 1443, Afonso, 1377 to 1461, the first Duke of Braganza. His mother, Inês Pires, has been variously described as the daughter of a Jewish cobbler and, alternatively, a member of a noble family. John I's legacy could not prevent a civil war in 1449 as a result of tensions within the royal family following the regency for Afonso V, ruled 1438 to 1481, who had come to the throne after Duarte, ruled 1433 to 1438, died of the plague, as his father John I had done before him. This premature death led to divisions over the regency, notably between Duarte's unpopular foreign wife, Eleanor of Aragon, who was backed by the nobility, and John's son Peter, Duke of Coimbra, who was supported by the Cortes and became regent. In the Civil War of 1449, Afonso, who was heavily influenced by Afonso, Duke of Braganza, turned on his uncle, Peter, who was defeated and killed during the Battle of Alfajubera. This was the relatively short Portuguese version of the English Wars of the Roses. John I, meanwhile, had seized Ceuta back in 1415, launching Portugal on a course of African expansion. The sea was seen as linking, not dividing. In part, there was a defensive fear that the Moors would strike back by sea, as they had done since 711, but there was also the ambition to take forward the process of driving them back, and notably so in competition with Castile.